So in this particular case, it's a private property, so they could request that bylaw come and remove illegal vehicles. It was a truck, a construction type truck that had a legal diesel container in it. The fear of it, as Councillor Fleury indicated last week, we should have evacuated the Rideau Centre. Well, that's not accurate because the risk was still very low. So in this particular case, the police attended initially, looked at the truck, spoke to the owner, told him he'd have to move it or he'd be getting a ticket. Bylaw eventually went out and gave them a ticket. Rideau Centre wanted it removed. It was one of those times when getting a tow for a small vehicle was more difficult, more challenging for us. And as a result of that, it took some time for us to secure the tow vehicle to come and actually remove it from the Rideau Centre. And when it finally, when the tow truck was finally en route, the owner moved it himself. So the Rideau Centre was frustrated that it took, a day and a half to actually deal with this issue. But again, when we're dealing with the whole protest, we're looking at risk, and we're looking at risk-based responses as well. So yes, there are, the councillor was concerned about the amount of layers with regards to us having to get the police involved and the police coming back and then the police saying they can't escort by law because they don't have the resources. And I could understand that frustration, and I could understand the Rideau Centre's frustration. They have valid concerns. From a risk perspective, this was also a very low risk incident.
This is again from you. You recognize this?
Yes.
Thank you. CHEO received a false bomb threat yesterday evening. Can you remind the Commissioner what CHEO stands for?
It's the Children's Hospital here in Ottawa.
So the Children's Hospital received a bomb threat. While false calls to 911 have been reduced, there are indications that outside interference persists. Is that correct? There was a bomb threat to the Children's Hospital on February 22nd?
Yes, there was.
Now, Mr. Ayotte, do you have any evidence that that bomb threat was connected to the convoy?
No.
But would you agree that that was part of the challenge in these events?
Correct. We received a tremendous amount of increased 911 calls that were also false during this time, higher than normal amounts of 911 calls. So we suspected that it was related.
Is it not true that the protest leaders were actually concerned about maintaining the safety lanes and raised that with you?
They did.
Right. And they wanted to ensure that the lanes were open so that emergency vehicles could always get through?
Correct.
Right. And the protest leaders cooperated with you and the city in maintaining those safety lanes, right?
Yes.
Right. And they maintained them?
For the most part, yes.
Yeah. And when new trucks would even arrive, they even organized to talk with what they referred to as block captains. Did they relay that to you?
No.
All right. But when new vehicles had arrived, to your knowledge, you agree that they always organized to make sure that those safety lanes were open?
Yes.
First off, I want to talk to you sort of in your capacity as being the director of safety and that sort of things, or overseeing that department. Can you agree with me that between January 27th and February 14th, there were over 3,000 tickets issued for provincial and municipal infractions?
That sounds correct. I'd have to actually look at the numbers, but we did provide all of those documents through the disclosure process.
Right. And were some of those tickets issued by the bylaw office?
Most of them were issued by the bylaw office.
Right. And I take it that during the issuing of those over 3,000 tickets, none of your bylaw officers were assaulted?
There were some contentious times, and so I can't say that none of them were assaulted, not that I know of.
Not that you know of, right. So you never had reported to you and no charges were laid against any protester issued a ticket with respect to physically assaulting a bylaw officer?
No, I just know that a couple of them got swarmed, but that they didn't get physically assaulted.
Okay, so 3,000 tickets is a lot. That's a lot of interactions with a lot of protesters, and not a single assaulting a peace officer charge was laid in relation to your bylaw officers.
That's correct.
I understand that you attended a logistics meeting at City Hall on Sunday evening of February 13th to discuss the truck's moves.
Yeah, that's the only time I ever met with the organizers of the protest.
Is it not true that at that meeting, the protesters explained that 2 removed camps outside of the city had already been established outside of the city where they would go to?
From my recollection, the discussion was around how are we going to move the trucks out of the residential areas, and that there was limited spots on Wellington Street. So I wasn't 100% sure we could move all 400 trucks onto Wellington. Actually, I knew we couldn't move all 400 trucks onto Wellington Street, and that the agreement, from as far as I was concerned, meant that they had to make sure that those other vehicles left town and left the City of Ottawa. And they said yes, that they had secured ground or
And that's
farmers' properties outside of the city.
Right. So that's what I'm trying to clarify, because I'm just trying to be fair to you, because there's going to be evidence about that. So they told you that they had set up 2 camps in properties they were allowed to be at outside of the city, and that they were looking to move there.
Yeah, they told me that, but I was also aware of that through other intelligence reports as well.
And then the plan was that other vehicles would go there, and then there would be some other vehicles that would go to Wellington. Is that correct?
Correct.
Right. And the city agreed to that.
Yes.
Right. Now, if the protesters were able to move the vehicles on Tuesday and Wednesday, which is February 15th and 16th, as had been agreed, can you agree that the result would have been most, if not all, of the vehicles would have been cleared out of downtown except for Wellington?
I can agree with that only because I didn't see a lot of vehicles moved except for the ones we allowed onto Wellington. So there seemed to be some movement onto Wellington, but no movement out of the city as was agreed to. So if there would have been a good faith movement on both parts, then I could maybe agree to that, but I can't today. Right,
but isn't it true, and the Commission's heard evidence, that the move onto Wellington eventually got blocked?
It got stopped by police, yes.
Right, so it got stopped by the police, so the deal didn't go through because of the police.
Yes.
Right.
There was a couple incidents discussed last week in the evidence involving the Chateau Laurier and the Rideau Center. And I was just hoping you could provide the commissioner with additional information on that. So starting with the Chateau Laurier, are you familiar with the concern that was raised?
Yes, it was raised directly to me and we had it investigated.
Can you explain to the commissioner what happened and what the city's follow-up was?
Certainly. Basically, there was an alarm for a water leak or a sprinkler head that had been knocked off, and so it was an alarm call for the fire service. The fire service responded with 4 different trucks from different directions, from different fire stations, which is normal from a deployment of our resources perspective. We don't respond with just one truck. We respond with multiple, especially for a high-risk setting like a hotel. On arrival, one of the trucks, got close enough but didn't get very close, and that's what was observed by the hotel. And I thought, oh my God, if there's an emergency, they can't get in here. The reality is there was 3 other trucks responding. The responders were already in the hotel dealing with the incident. There was no delay in response. So this was a time where people were very aware of all kinds of different issues, and it was being raised through the BIAs and Hotel Association that these types of concerns needed to be addressed because of public safety, their liability insurance, et cetera. So while I understand their fear, the risk of this call was very low, and we had pre-planned that facility daily, and we've had conversations with the managers since. So really, from a risk perspective, it was a relatively low risk event, but it did highlight that, if there was a fire, we may not get all 4 trucks there immediately, and there would be some need for movement of the protest vehicles. So while it was an incident that was looked at, it wasn't deemed as high risk as it was being first explained to us.